It was only a few years ago when Donny van de Beek was starting for Ajax, playing in a Champions League semi-final and ending as a Nations League runner-up with the Netherlands. Then in came Manchester United, thinking it would be a great step towards his career. But here we are, 19 minutes of action so far this season for the Dutch international, even with a manager who knows him well. And this not only is worrying for him, but of course, Manchester United and Holland indeed, and the World Cup options for the midfielder. Donny van der Beek is where I'm going with this. Yes, I'm Luis Miguel Echegaray, LME, here with ESPN FC royalty in Alejandro Moreno, and of course, our tremendous correspondent, Manchester United's Rob Dawson. Everybody, welcome. Well, Rob, give us the latest on this, because I really thought as soon as Ten Hag came in, well, that's great. It's going to be heaven for Van de Beek, but it hasn't been the case.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. He's had a tough time in Manchester anyway since signing from Ajax. I think in the summer, a lot of fans thought that because his former Ajax manager was coming in, Erik Ten Hag, that he was really going to be the man to kind of kickstart his career at Old Trafford, and we were going to see the real Donny van de Beek. And we're a couple of months into the season now. He's injured with no prospect really of coming back anytime soon. He hasn't had a lot of opportunities, and he certainly won't go to the World Cup with Holland now. And it's reached a point where he's starting looking at Donny van de Beek and thinking that he's probably going to have to leave Old Trafford to get back on track. You know, this was meant to be a move that was meant to sort of elevate him to the next level of player. Join those top ranked players, and it's just not worked out. And again, we've reached a point where he's probably going to have to leave, find a move, and find regular games somewhere else.
Sometimes we think of players from a philosophical perspective in terms of our analysis of those players. So we think, well, naturally, he's going to be able to take his game from Ajax and become a different player or a better player, as Rob just mentioned, elevating his game at Manchester United. And it hasn't happened, right? And so then we start to think about, well, is it the manager? Is it the style? Is it the position? At some point, once you've had many different managers and you have many different opportunities and different chances for the player to feature, and he hasn't been able to stick, and injuries have been a problem, then you have to focus on, never mind the manager, never mind the club, never mind the situation or whatever perspective you want to look at it, maybe the player. At some point, you have to look at him, at Van de Beek, and say, maybe he's just not good enough. Maybe what we saw at Ajax was as good as it was going to be for him, and the jump is just not going to happen. Whether that's a physical thing, whether that's a mental thing, whether it's a combination of the two, he has not been able to take the jump. And it feels like, yes, coming into the summer, that you thought, well, Ten Hag being there, clearly this is going to be his best case scenario, best opportunity. And it hasn't been. It's time to turn the page on Donny van de Beek and what he was going to be able to do at Manchester United. I don't think that's happening.
It's been incredible just to hear that, Rob, because, you know, it's such a talented, and he's 23, 24 years old. So there's plenty of room to improve, but it's hard to disagree with Ali because we haven't seen anything, definitely from a Manchester United perspective. Is it time for Manchester United, at least in January, to be like, all right, let's move on with this? It's just not working out for anybody.
I think so. I mean, it certainly feels like the situation has reached that point. I mean, this is a guy who at 21 years old was nominated for the Ballon d'Or. I mean, that's how good he was in that run with Ajax, the Champions League semi-final, a run that was obviously ended by Tottenham in the end. You know, he's 25 years old now. The drop-off in his career has been absolutely unbelievable. And now it has reached a point where you do wonder whether it is the player. You know, you speculate whether he doesn't fit into English football or whether he's not playing in the right position. You know, as we just said there, at some point the responsibility has to be on the player. And this isn't a case that one manager hasn't fancied one player. He struggled with every single manager he's had at Manchester United. This is the case under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. It was the case under Ralf Rangnick. It's now the case under Erik Ten Hag, a guy that knew him from Ajax anyway. And you do have to reach the point where you have to say that this isn't going to work out. For whatever reason, this player at this club is not going to work out. And you do have to look to move. That the problem that Man United have got now is that this guy's got a contract till, I think, 2025 with the option of an extra year. They spent an awful lot of money on him, you know, 35 million down, raising to about 40 million pounds, which is an awful lot of money. They're going to want some kind of feedback for him if they're going to let him leave. And because Donny van de Beek hasn't made an impression in the Premier League, you start to wonder where he's going to go. There's been talk of maybe Leicester on loan. There's been talk possibly of going back to Ajax. But the market for him isn't going to be that massive because he hasn't torn up any trees at United. There aren't going to be many clubs looking at him and thinking, this is a guy we desperately want in our midfield. So, ultimately, it's going to be about which club decide they've got a gap in midfield and whether they can do a deal with United. At the moment, that's not guaranteed. We'll just have to see what happens in January or possibly further down the line next summer.
Ale, there's a connection here that I'm seeing, and it's not just about Van de Beek or not even Erik ten Hag, but it's also about the ownership here and the way that this club scouts. I mean, back in 2020, it was Diallo, Telles, Pellistri, Cavani. I mean, that window set Manchester United back a little bit. Is it fair to say that Van de Beek is a perfect example of how just terrible the player scouting, the sort of transitional look into players that can come into the squad, a problem as well? So yes, Van de Beek is an issue, but also Manchester United, you need to be a little bit better at looking at who can help you.
Well, you don't get to the point to where Manchester United have been over the last couple of seasons without there being some systemic issues. And part of those systemic issues have to do with the fact that, yes, your scouting and player identification hasn't quite been as strong as you would want it to be. Now, in the case of Van de Beek, to be fair to Manchester United, as Rob just mentioned, he was hot. This guy was hot at Ajax, and there were people lining up for him. And so while you may think, oh, what were Manchester United thinking? Well, this is a couple of years down the road, and now you have seen what Van de Beek has been at Manchester United, so it's easy to say, well, they got that wrong. Yes, they did. But honestly, there's a lot of people that would have gotten it wrong back then. People were lining up for Van de Beek. He hasn't become the player. Now, in terms of the other names, yes, I think you can point the finger and say, what in the world is going on at Manchester United? But I think you can say that about Manchester United in every sort of decision that they have made since then. You just kind of go, does that make sense? Did that make sense? Was that smart? I don't think so. You can continue to have those conversations about Manchester United. And I think the first time that we actually had a positive conversation regarding transfer for Manchester United over the last couple of seasons was Casemiro. It felt like, well, they're going to take a step forward with this guy. They're bringing in a world-class player, a Champions League winner, a guy who's going to change the personality of this team in that midfield. And then Ten Hag doesn't play him in big games. And I'm just like, all right, you know what? You guys win, I lose. I have no answers anymore.
Well, to that point, actually, just to end it up here, Rob, Casemiro, but also, Harry Maguire is being dropped, Luke Shaw as well. I mean, it's kind of nice, I guess, to see Ten Hag doesn't have favorites, right? Or is it something else here? Is it just that Ten Hag likes to prove a point, perhaps, where there isn't one? How do you analyze that perspective from a rotational standpoint? And some players that you think would be definite starters are not doing so.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly one of the things that has really impressed fans with Ten Hag, that he's come in and there's been no room for reputation or transfer fee. He's picked a team based on the best players that he has available. And if that means dropping Cristiano Ronaldo or dropping Harry Maguire, dropping Luke Shaw, all guys who were so regular last season, he doesn't care. He just picks on form. If the team is winning, he tries to keep the bulk of that team for the next game. And it's gone down very well with the fan base and also in the dressing room. One of the criticisms of the last sort of two, possibly 18 months, 2 years, is that managers were sticking with players who were clearly out of form. Harry Maguire is a perfect case in point. That last season, I think most people could see that he was really, really struggling. There was a point at which pundits and fans were sort of saying, the guy needs to come out of the firing line. He needs to have a break, even just mentally rather than physically. And Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Ralph Rangnick never decided to do that. Ten Hag has come in after 2 defeats in the first 2 games and decided that Harry Maguire, even though he's club captain, doesn't play anymore. And has told him that you're not going to get back in the team until you're playing better than Lisandro Martinez or Rafael Varane. And at the moment, obviously he's injured right now, but so far he's not been able to do that. And that just raises the standards of the whole club. It raises the standards of the team and raises the standards of training. And that's exactly what fans have been calling out for. That players aren't just going to play because they've arrived on big transfer fees or because of their reputation or because of their international footballers. They have to train at a very, very high level every single day. And that's the only way you can get back in the team.
Maybe that's something that Gareth Southgate should take very close note of. And speaking of which, Donny van de Beek's obviously future with the Netherlands, especially in Qatar, is a major, major issue. We'll have to wait and see if the Dutch midfielder moves on in January, or if indeed, just like Rob and Ali noted too, he's just way too expensive and inconsistent.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.